I have a notebook. It's not a journal. I want to be clear about that. Journals are for feelings. This notebook is for facts. Date, time, what was said, what was done, what was explained away. I started it on a Tuesday in October, 3 years into my marriage. The night my husband's mother told me I needed to learn how to take a joke. I had a notebook in my bag. I always carry one. I'm an accountant. It's a habit. And when I got into the car that night, I opened it to a blank page, and I wrote down exactly what had happened at dinner. Not how I felt, what happened. My name is Claire, and this is the story of what I found when I stopped asking myself whether I was being too sensitive and started writing things down instead. I met Owen at a work conference in Bristol. He was presenting on supply chain risk. Not the most romantic setting, I'll admit. And I was there representing our firm's audit team. He was funny in a dry, understated way. He asked smart questions during the Q&A. Afterward, he found me by the coffee station and said, "You asked the only question that actually mattered in there. Everyone else was performing." I thought, this man sees things. I was 31. He was 34. We dated for 16 months before he proposed. He proposed on a Wednesday at home, with shepherd's pie on the stove and a ring that had been his grandmother's. No grand gesture, no performance, just. "I've been thinking about this for a while. I think we should get married. What do you think?" I thought it was the most honest proposal I'd ever heard of. We got married on a Saturday in June. Small wedding, 40 people, a pub reception, my dress from a boutique in Bath that cost less than some people spend on flowers. His family sat on the right, mine on the left. His mother, Margaret, wore a cream blazer that was close enough to white to make my sister raise her eyebrows. I noticed. I didn't say anything. That was the first entry that should have gone in the notebook, if I'd had it then. The first 2 years were fine. Not perfect, no marriage is, but fine in the way that matters. We had rhythms. Saturday mornings he made eggs, I made coffee. We walked on Sunday afternoons, not always talking, but together. He had a habit of reading in bed with a torch-style reading lamp that cast this warm, small circle of light, and I found it comforting in a way I couldn't explain. Like he was always there, even when he was somewhere else in his head. The trouble, when I look back now, started so slowly that I didn't recognize it as trouble. It started with his mother. Margaret had opinions about most things, about the way I loaded the dishwasher, about the fact that Owen and I hadn't started talking about children yet, about the shade of gray we painted our hallway. She called it depressing. About my job. She didn't say it was a problem that I earned more than Owen. She just asked, often, whether I found the work stressful, whether I was sure I wanted to keep doing it, whether it left me enough time for everything else. Everything else. That phrase always had a shape to it. But of a woman standing in a kitchen, being enough for a man. The first time I mentioned it to Owen, he laughed gently and said, "She's old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it." The second time he sighed and said, "Can we not do this after every visit? You always come home wound up." The third time, when I said, "Margaret made a comment tonight that I found really undermining," he said, "Claire, you are too sensitive about her. She's just talking." And I sat with that. I turned it over. I asked myself, as I would ask myself dozens of times over the next 2 years, whether he was right. Whether the problem was the way I received things, not the things themselves. That Tuesday in October, after the joke at dinner incident, I got in the car. I opened the notebook. I wrote down what Margaret had said, word for word. I wrote down what I had said in response. I wrote down what Owen had said when I brought it up in the car on the way home. I looked at it. I read it back, and I thought, that's not sensitivity. That's a pattern. I want to tell you about the notebook method because I think it's the most important thing I ever did for myself in that marriage. I didn't use it as a weapon. I didn't use it to build a case. I used it because I had started to distrust my own memory, which, I now know, is exactly what happens when someone tells you, repeatedly, that what you experienced isn't what happened. You stopped trusting yourself. The notebook gave me something to hold on to. By the end of the first month, I had 11 entries. Not all of them were about Margaret. Some were about Owen directly. The time he told me I was making it weird when I said I'd been feeling lonely lately. The time I came home after a difficult day at work, and he didn't ask about it, not once, all evening. And when I mentioned it at bedtime, he said he'd been busy and I was making him feel guilty for no reason. The time I cried in the bathroom after his birthday dinner because his whole family had spent the evening talking about plans for Christmas, and no one had asked once whether my family might have plans too. And when I told Owen later, he said they weren't excluding you. They were just talking about their side. You could have joined in. Could have joined in. I read that back in the notebook. I sat with it. I thought about what it meant that the solution in his mind was always mine. That I needed to be less sensitive, join in more, not make it weird, stop coming home wound up. That the adjustments were always mine to make. Now here is the part I need to say carefully, because I want to be fair. Owen was not a cruel man. He was not aggressive. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't belittle me in front of people. He did it quietly, privately, in a way that left no marks. And I genuinely believe that for a long time, he didn't know he was doing it. He had grown up in a house where Margaret's version of events was always correct, where feelings were inconvenient, where the person who got upset was the problem, not the thing that caused the upset. He had learned a way of being, and I had walked into it without reading the instruction manual. But here is also what I know. Not knowing you're doing harm doesn't mean the harm doesn't happen. By year 3, I had started to shrink. I am not being dramatic when I say that. I am an accountant. I deal in precision. I am telling you precisely, I had become smaller. I second-guessed things I had been certain of before I met him. I apologized in advance for opinions. I pre-edited conversations in my head, removing anything that might cause friction before I opened my mouth. I had a colleague at the time, Patrice, who told me once over lunch that I seemed like I'd gone quiet. She said it like a question. I told her I was fine. That night I wrote it in the notebook. The moment things began to shift happened in the least dramatic way possible. It was a Saturday morning. Owen had gone to play football with his friends. He did this most Saturdays, which was fine. We had our own things. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I was reading back through the notebook. Not for any particular reason. I just picked it up. I read from the beginning, all of it. 3 years of entries. And I noticed something I hadn't seen before, because I'd only ever been looking at individual incidents. I hadn't seen the shape of the whole thing. Every single entry, every one, ended the same way, with me absorbing it, adjusting, going quiet, taking it on. There was not one entry where Owen had said, "I hear you. Let me think about that." Not one where he'd come back the next day and said, "I was thinking about what you said. You were right." Not one where he'd noticed, without being told, that I was struggling. 3 years, not once. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I finished my coffee. I made another one. I sat with what I was looking at. This wasn't sensitivity. This wasn't me being difficult. This was a marriage where one person was doing all the emotional carrying, and the other person had never once thought to ask why she always looked so tired. I didn't do anything dramatic. I want to say that clearly. There was no confrontation that Saturday, no ultimatum. I just decided to stop performing. It sounds simple, it wasn't. What I mean by performing is this constant low-level effort of managing how I came across. The pre-editing, the apologies in advance, the careful way I'd frame a concern so it didn't sound like a complaint. The deliberate softening of my own feelings so Owen wouldn't feel accused. I stopped doing it, not to punish him, not to prove a point, because I was exhausted, and the only person whose feelings I'd been successfully managing was not mine. The first time Owen made a comment about me being wound up after a visit to his mother, I didn't deflect. I didn't soften it. I said, I don't think I'm wound up. I think I'm telling you something that happened, and I'd like you to hear it. He looked at me for a moment. He said, right, okay. He didn't hear it. Not really. But I noticed that I felt different. I had said the thing plainly. I had not apologized for having a response to my own experience, and I was still sitting upright. That was new. Over the next few months, things became uncomfortable in our house in a way they hadn't been before. Not loud. We were never a loud household, but there was a friction in the air that hadn't been there when I was managing everything smoothly. Owen noticed. Of course he did. He started saying things like, "You've been really prickly lately, and I feel like I'm walking on eggshells." Walking on eggshells. I had heard that phrase before. I'd seen it used on internet forums, in comment sections, in articles about difficult relationships. I had always associated it with the person saying it. The person walking on eggshells, that's the one who's suffering, right? That's the fragile one. But when Owen said it, I understood something I hadn't understood before. He was describing his experience of me no longer managing his comfort. He wasn't walking on eggshells because I was volatile or unpredictable. He was walking on eggshells because I had stopped guaranteeing his ease. And he had confused those two things, my labor and my stability, for so long that when the labor stopped, it felt to him like instability. I wrote that in the notebook. Then I closed the notebook and I put it in my work bag. And I made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Adaeze Okonkwo. She worked from a room above a pharmacy in our town, and she had a very specific quality that I came to rely on completely. She never told me what to think. She asked questions, and then she waited. And she had this way of sitting with silence that made the silence feel productive rather than uncomfortable. In our third session, I brought the notebook. I didn't read from it. I just put it on the table between us and said, I've been keeping this for 3 years. Every time something happened that I was told didn't happen, or that I was too sensitive about, I wrote it down. She looked at it. She said, "What does it feel like to have it?" I said, "Like proof." She said, "Proof of what?" I thought about it. I said, "That I wasn't imagining it." She nodded. She said, "That's important." Then she asked something I wasn't expecting. She said, "What would it mean if you hadn't kept it? If you'd trusted yourself without needing to write it down?" I didn't have an answer. I sat with the question for a long time. The whole rest of that session, and the drive home, and most of the following week. What would it mean? It would mean I would have had to trust myself, my own perception, my own steady reading of what was happening in my own house. And somewhere along the way, I had lost the ability to do that without external support. Without evidence, without a paper trail in my own handwriting. I came back the next week and I said, I think I lost faith in myself. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know I need to find my way back to it. Dr. Okonkwo said, "That's the work." We spent a lot of sessions after that talking about why I had needed proof in my own marriage, why the bar for trusting my own experience had become. Did I write it down? Why a woman with a postgraduate qualification and 15 years of professional experience had somehow come to require a notebook to confirm that her feelings were real. That, Dr. Okonkwo told me, is what sustained minimization does to a person. It doesn't feel like abuse. It doesn't feel like anything dramatic. It just quietly, over years, erodes the ground beneath you until you are standing on nothing and calling it solid. I want to tell you about the conversation that changed everything. It was about 6 months after I'd started therapy, a Sunday evening. Owen and I had been to his parents for lunch. This was a monthly thing, more or less. And on the drive home, Margaret had done something she'd done before. Made a comment about the fact that Owen and I still didn't have children. She hadn't directed it at me. She had said it to Owen. She'd said, "You're not getting younger, darling. You both need to get on with it." In the car on the way home, I said, "That comment from your mother bothered me." Owen said, I said, I'd like to talk about it. He said, what is there to talk about? She does this. You know she does. And I said quietly, clearly, without pre-editing, yes, she does. And every time she does, you either don't respond or you respond to me afterward as though I'm the one creating a problem. And I've been sitting with that for a long time, and I don't want to sit with it anymore. Owen was quiet. I said, I'm not asking you to fight with your mother. I'm asking you to be on my side when it matters. I'm asking you to say something, anything. I'm asking you to be present in our marriage, not just in your family's story of it. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, I don't know what you want from me, Claire. And I said, I know, that's the problem. We tried counseling. I'll give Owen credit for agreeing to it. He wasn't enthusiastic, but he came. He sat in the chair beside me, and he answered the questions honestly, as far as I could tell. The counselor, a man named Patrick, with a very neutral face, asked us both to describe what we thought was happening in our marriage. Owen said he felt like he could never get it right, that no matter what he did, I found something to be unhappy about, that he felt criticized constantly and didn't know how to fix it. I said that I had been carrying the emotional weight of our marriage alone for years, that I had been systematically told my responses were excessive, that I had been so thoroughly encouraged to doubt my own perceptions that I had needed to keep a written record just to trust my own experience. I opened the notebook and I put it on the coffee table. Patrick looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He asked Owen, did you know Claire was keeping this? Owen said no. He asked, how does it make you feel to know she felt she needed to? Owen was quiet for a long time. Then he said, sad, I think, sad and embarrassed. I looked at him. That was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 3 years. And I want to be honest with you too, because I think this is the part of the story that people don't tell. That moment, Owen's face in that room, the genuine shame on it, nearly undid everything. Because I loved him. I had always loved him. And it is one thing to hold a boundary against someone who doesn't care. It is something entirely different to hold it against someone who is sitting in a counselor's office, looking at a notebook they never knew existed, and realizing for the first time what they've been doing. I drove home that evening, and I sat in the car for 20 minutes before I went inside. I thought, maybe I've been too hard, maybe this is fixable. Maybe I've been documenting everything when I should have been saying more, sooner. I nearly talked myself back into absorbing it. I want you to know that. Because if you've ever been in that chair, if you've ever held your ground, right up until the moment the other person looked genuinely broken by it, you'll know how easy it is to become the one who takes it back. I didn't. But it wasn't because I was strong. It was because the next morning I opened the notebook. I read the first entry, then the third, then the one about the birthday dinner. And I remembered, the sadness in that room was real. But so was the notebook. Both things were true. And I had to decide which truth to build on. Counseling helped, in the way that putting a light on in a dark room helps. You can see everything more clearly. That's not always comfortable. What became clear over the following months was this. Owen was not unwilling to change. He was genuinely trying, I saw it. He started asking more questions. He started saying, when his mother made a comment, Mum, I don't think that's helpful. Small things, real things. But there was something else that also became clear. I had spent so long managing my own smallness that I didn't entirely know who I was anymore in the context of our marriage. I'd built so many habits of shrinking, pre-editing, apologizing, absorbing, that even when the pressure to do those things lifted, I kept doing them out of reflex, out of 3 years of practice. Dr. Okonkwo and I worked on that for a long time, and during that work, I came to understand something that I hadn't expected. Staying in a marriage because the other person is trying is not the same as staying because you want to be there. Those are different things. I need to tell you what happened with the notebook. Toward the end of the counseling, Patrick asked me to bring it to a session and read some of it aloud, not to Owen. This was an individual session. Just to read it to myself, out loud in the room. I did. I read the first entry, Margaret's joke at dinner, Owen's response in the car. I read 12 more after that. And about halfway through, I stopped. Not because I was upset, because I realized I didn't need to keep reading. I knew what was in it. I'd lived it. Patrick asked me what I was feeling. I said, I think I want to put it away now. He said, why? I said, because I don't need proof anymore. I know what happened. I was there. He nodded. He said, what does it feel like to say that? I said, solid, like standing on something solid. Owen and I separated 14 months after that Sunday car ride. The decision came slowly and then all at once, the way those decisions do. There was no dramatic final scene, no raised voices. We sat at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd read the notebook that Saturday morning, and we talked for a long time, and we were both honest, and we were both kind, as far as kindness was possible. He said he was sorry. He meant it. I could tell. I said I knew. And I meant that too. We sold the house. I moved into a flat on the east side of the city. 2 bedrooms, more light than I'd expected. Patrice from work came and helped me move the boxes. She said, you seem different, I said. Different how? She said. Like you're taking up the right amount of space. I laughed. She didn't know how much that meant. I had spent 3 years making myself smaller so someone else would feel larger. I had pre-edited and softened and absorbed and apologized. I had kept a notebook to convince myself that my own experiences were real. I was done with all of that. That evening, after Patrice left, I stood in the middle of my new kitchen, just stood there in the quiet, and I said something out loud to no one. I said, I live here now. It sounds like nothing, but I meant it the way you mean something when you've been a long time away from it. I live here. In this flat, in this city, in this life, in this body. I live here, no pre-editing required. I still have the notebook. It's in a box in my spare room, with some other things from that time. A few photographs, the order of service from our wedding, a birthday card Owen gave me in year 2 that I'd kept because it was genuinely kind. I don't read it. I don't need to. But I haven't thrown it away either, because there's something important about having it. Not as proof, not anymore, but as a reminder of the version of myself who needed proof, who had learned to distrust her own perceptions so thoroughly that she required written evidence of her own life. I keep it because I never want to forget how easy it is to talk a woman out of herself, how it doesn't require cruelty, how it can happen over years, sentence by sentence. You're too sensitive. She doesn't mean anything by it. You always come home wound up, until one day she is standing in her own life and everything feels like someone else's memory. I keep it because I want to remember that I found my way back. I went back to work full-time that autumn. I took on a project I'd been hesitating over for 2 years, a restructuring assignment that required travel and long hours, and the kind of focused, difficult work I had been quietly talking myself out of while I was busy making myself smaller. I was good at it. I had always been good at it. My manager said at my review, "You've come back to yourself this year." I laughed. I said, "That's one way to put it." I have a plant on my windowsill now, a peace lily that my downstairs neighbor Carol gave me when I moved in. She's 81 and she grows everything. She said, "Peace lilies are dramatic. They droop when they need water, so you always know. They're not subtle about what they need." I like that. I like the idea of something that tells you clearly what it needs and droops visibly when it doesn't get it, and then comes back upright as soon as you give it water. I've thought about that plant a lot, about what it means to have needs that you communicate plainly, about what it means to stop apologizing for needing what you need. I water it every Sunday. If you are in a marriage where you have started to doubt your own memory, I want to say something to you. Not something complicated, something simple. Write it down, not to build a case, not to win an argument, but for yourself. So you have something solid to hold on to when the ground starts to feel uncertain. So that the version of you who is being told she's too sensitive has somewhere to go where she's simply witnessed by herself. You are allowed to trust what you experienced. You are allowed to need things and to say so plainly, without pre-editing and apologizing and softening. You are allowed to take up the right amount of space. And if someone has spent years making you forget that, it is never too late to remember. The notebook is not the point. The notebook is just the beginning. You are the point. You always were. I went for a walk last Sunday, early before the city woke up properly. Past the park, down to the canal, which I love at that time of morning. The light comes off the water in this horizontal way that makes everything look briefly like a painting. I had my coffee in a travel cup. I had my coat. I had my own company, which has become, over the past year, something I genuinely enjoy rather than something I tolerate. I thought about Owen, not painfully, with something closer to clarity. I thought about the man at the conference who had said, "You asked the only question that actually mattered." And I thought about how strange and sad and human it is that someone can see you clearly in one moment, and then, over years of accumulated habit and inherited pattern, learn not to. I don't carry bitterness about it anymore. I carried it for a while. Now I carry something else. A woman has to know what happened to her, not to punish anyone for it, just to know. To have her own account of her own life, in her own words, witnessed by her own steady hand. That is not sensitivity. That is survival. And then, when the survival is done, it becomes something better than survival. It becomes just living. I'm doing that now. It turns out I'm quite good at it.